Hello and welcome to the webinar. My name is Samantha Aldrich and I am a revitalization specialist with the Department of State. First off, I just wanted to say congratulations. You are attending this webinar because you have been selected as a local planning committee member for a downtown revitalization initiative or a New York Forward community. And this training really does mark the official kickoff of both the DRI and the New York Forward programs. Just so everyone is aware, this session is being recorded and will be a duration of approximately 1 hour. If you do have a question during the training, please enter it in the chat box located at the bottom of your screen, and we will have a couple opportunities to answer those throughout the presentation. Just as a precursor to the overall conversation, the webinar will be general to both the DRI and New York Forward program as a whole, and the presentation will not be locally specific to any individual community, but if you do have questions related to your community, please reach out to your Department of State project manager. And before we jump into the presentation, we do have a video message from the Secretary of State, Robert Rodriguez, that we would like to play for you.
As we begin our 7th round of the Downtown Revitalization Initiative and the 2nd round of New York Forward, I'd like to welcome and thank you all for being a part of your local planning committee. Congratulations to each of you and your communities. Being here today signifies your dedication to your community and your commitment to the transformative journey that is ahead. DRI has been a cornerstone of the state's economic development strategy and has helped to accelerate and bolster the revitalization of downtown neighborhoods across the state. And with this program, communities that have long faced disinvestment, decline, and deindustrialization are being transformed into vibrant centers, offering a high quality of life, attracting good jobs and businesses, and providing housing and amenities for all. Building on the success of DRI, Governor Hochul launched a new program, New York Forward, to give that same opportunity to smaller rural communities. And having worked on my community boards and initiatives in my community, I know firsthand the successes that can come as a result of local planning, consensus building, and developing partnerships amongst the community. That is what creates lasting change and builds capacity to keep momentum going. And that's why DRI and New York Forward work. It isn't the state telling you what community development is, what economic development looks like, or what investments need to be made in your community. It's the opposite. It's building upon the foundations that you've built, your community-driven plans and investments, and bringing the community together to identify key projects that will accelerate the revitalization of the downtown and reinvigorate our communities. The strategic investment plans that each of your communities will craft will create lasting impacts on each of your downtowns. With public and private partners, you'll build and select a series of catalytic and synergistic projects that will breathe life back into our downtowns, creating greater opportunities for New York residents, businesses, and visitors alike. So, we are ready to hit the ground running, and after this training, you will be too. As the leaders in your respective communities, you'll play a critical role in the planning and implementation process by sharing your insights on which proposed projects provide the most merit, meaning, and transformative value to your vision of your downtown. Being an LPC member will require a duty and obligation to listen and hear what your community has to say, and ultimately to bring that back to the table in order to make hard decisions. So your role over the next few months will involve hearing from diverse voices, building consensus, and reaching out to residents and stakeholders so that they can effectively engage with this process and have a seat at the table. So with that, I'd like to thank you all again for the vital role you'll play in this important process. Thank you in advance for the numerous meetings, efforts, time, and energy that you'll be committing in order to bring this transformative change to your communities. And I'm thrilled to see the renaissance of our state's downtown neighborhoods and look forward to working with you all to do that in the next few months.
All right, so let's expand upon the question, why are you here? As I mentioned at the beginning, your community or a community that you are directly affiliated with was selected for a DRI or a New York Forward this round. And again, just congratulations. I really do think that this round will be immensely beneficial to all of the winners across the state. But in addition to that, there are also a myriad of other reasons why you are here, and that might be your knowledge of the local community or your expertise in a particular area or an industry. And we are expecting that you will be able to share this distinctive knowledge and expertise with other LPC members and the public throughout the process. Again, importantly, your wide network and your deep connections to the community and the region will be utilized to encourage public input and participation throughout the upcoming planning process. And you will recognize after this training and during future meetings that ensuring authentic and inclusive engagement is a critical piece of the program. So all of these attributes really work together and contribute to you being such a valuable asset for the DRI and New York Forward program and the respective community in which you represent. So today's session, we will provide a brief overview of the DRI and New York Forward programs, their planning processes. Then we will review the role of the LPC, what you can expect, and how you can contribute. Then we will go through the Code of Conduct to you, which does explain your duty to act in the public interest in this role. And then we will go through next steps so you know what to expect after this training. So what are the DRI and New York Forward programs? Well, they are two separate programs, but they have very common goals. Overall, these are statewide investment programs, and they are aimed at reinvigorating local and regional economies. So the DRI was first launched in 2016 and is now in its seventh round. This round, Governor Hochul announced a total of $200 million for the DRI and New York Forward program. So $100 million will be allocated specifically for the DRI program and $100 million for the New York Forward. For the DRI, there are 10 regions throughout New York State, so $10 million will be allocated for one community in each region. And then for the New York Forward, this round, there are two winners in each region, each getting $4.5 million. In general, DRI communities typically represent larger geographical areas with a regional draw and major employment centers, and these usually consist of dense urban development, maybe some different transportation options, including public transit, a node of activity, whereas the New York Forward is intended for smaller communities and neighborhoods, and these are generally, a corridor of activity or a concentrated node. And these communities usually have less dense development, but overall are still compact, walkable, and have distinct senses of place. Specifically, the DRI and New York Forward strive to create active downtowns with a strong sense of place and a robust mix of uses that support a diverse population. So in a healthy downtown, we want to see bustling places full of residents, workers, and visitors that really add to the excitement within an area. So these healthy downtowns help to create a high quality of life, attract investment, and grow the local tax base. So one thing that the state is putting a little bit more focus on this round and a few previous rounds is finding ways to mitigate climate change impacts. And we will be doing this through decarbonization. And you'll learn more about that through the rest of the planning process as well. But the goals of the program are very critical to understand because they are intended to guide the DRI and New York Forward program and help you inform project development as well as the selection of awards. So what is the DRI program from start to finish, and how did your community get here? Well, back in September of 2023, there was an open solicitation for applications for communities to apply to the DRI and the New York Forward programs. In many cases, the state regional economic development councils reviewed those applications. Some of them formed subcommittees, selected communities for interviews, and they were ultimately responsible for nominating the winners. So the winning communities were then announced across the state for both programs at the end of last year, and some at the beginning of this year as well. So once those communities are announced, they embark upon a planning process, which is where your focus as the local planning committee will be. So during the next 8 months from now until the end of the year, the selected communities and you as an LPC will work with a consultant team to refine the community's revitalization vision and identify, evaluate, and select projects to recommend to the state for funding. Once those final documents are submitted, the state evaluates projects that are recommended by the LPC and awards funding to only those that are most likely to have a catalytic and transformational impact in each of the downtowns. And then the projects are then implemented, hopefully within the next several years. So the intention of this program is really to award projects that are ready for implementation in the very near term. So let's go over the planning process and who is involved in it. So there are many people and organizations involved in the process, and you can see them on the right-hand side of the screen or left-hand side of the screen as those major parties. So let's start with state agencies. So starting with the state agencies, we do have Department of State who administers the DRI and New York Forward programs, and they are supported by Empire State Development, Homes and Community Renewal, and NYSERDA. So the agency's roles is to be a technical resource and support the facilitation of the program. Our goal is to manage and assist the consultant team and help to review approved documents as well as act as stewards of the community. We also have you as the LPC, and your role is really important, and we'll expand upon it later in the presentation, but your job is to be a voice for your community, aid in decision making. So we will ask that you actively participate in regular committee meetings and provide feedback to the consultant and state teams, as well as provide insight into the public outreach activities that will be implemented. The consultant team, which has already been hired and contracted with the state, will take your community through the public planning process. And they are tasked with facilitating all public engagement, help to identify, evaluate, and develop the projects that come forward, as well as create the required program documents. Lastly, we have the community, and we'll explore several avenues of engaging your community members both effectively and often, because we want to know their thoughts and perspectives on what community revitalization looks like to them, and specifically the projects that they highly support to implement that vision. We will have many touch points with the community throughout the process, and we'll utilize that input to help select the projects that will help the community succeed. So here's a quick overview of what that planning process looks like, as well as the major milestones involved. So as part of the DRI and New York Forward application, communities did submit a preliminary revitalization vision, as well as potential projects for implementation. And over the first 3 months, the LPC and the community will be working to refine these initial ideas. But we aren't starting over with creating a revitalization vision. This process just lets us as a state and as a community ensure that all voices are heard and there's an opportunity for additional projects to be considered. We also want to make sure that projects undergo a comprehensive vetting process to ensure they're ready for implementation. Then we'll also understand what the opportunities and challenges are for each of the communities. We will then go through a project development and evaluation process, and the consultant team that has been assigned to each community will help the LPC as well as project sponsors develop those projects and help to create project recommendations. I'm sure as you can gather so far, you can understand that public engagement during the program is critical. And it will occur throughout the entire planning process to ensure that community needs, opportunities, and challenges are identified. Engagement activities will be led by the consultant team, but the LPC will have significant input on who the team should be reaching out to, the most effective methods and locations for outreach, and how to best obtain input from various facets of the community. As part of the program, there are minimum engagement requirements. However, again, we'll be looking to LPC members because you know your community best, and we want you to help point the consultant in the right direction on appropriate outreach strategies, as well as locations that might be tailored to your specific community's needs. So playing an active role in outreach on your end is important to ensuring a successful project. So we want your ideas, your networks, and your connections to engage as many people as possible, as well as many different facets of the population as possible. At the end of the planning process, the LPC and community will be submitting what we call a strategic investment plan, or an SIP. This gets submitted to the state, and it does contain pertinent information developed throughout the process, including a detailed description and analysis of the downtown area. It also provides an explanation of the community's visions and the priorities. And most importantly, it describes the slate of projects that are recommended to be funded by the state. This SIP gets submitted to the state for review, and multiple agencies will evaluate each of the projects that are recommended for funding. The majority of the strategic investment plan, as I just mentioned, is comprised of what we refer to project profiles, which essentially are detailed descriptions and supporting documentations related to the individual projects that are being proposed. So throughout the process, the LPC will be utilizing that information in these profiles to ensure and select the projects that are most aligned with the community vision and have the highest potential for success. So your main task is to represent a set of projects to the state for potential funding, utilize the information gathered by the consultant team and project sponsor, as well as feedback from the community. One thing that is important to understand is that throughout the process, you will likely see in your community a total DRI, or New York Forward request amount, that is over the award. So you might see proposed projects that are requesting over $10 million or over $4.5 million as a whole. So your task will be to eliminate projects that may not be as strong or compelling for economic revitalization, so that we can really narrow down those that are most catalytic and transformational and most ready for implementation. So you have been lucky enough to be selected to serve on the LPC, and what does that mean for you, and what can you expect over the next few months? I just wanted to take a little step back here and talk about the LPC itself. So the LPC is comprised of a number of key stakeholders, community leaders, representatives who are involved on a deep level with their respective communities and can provide insightful input on various topics. So some of the typical interest groups that you might find on an LPC include maybe neighborhood groups, civic associations, potentially business and property owners, community foundations, chambers of commerce, local nonprofit organizations, could be cultural and educational institutions, advocacy organizations, or very involved local residents. So the members of the LPC are nominated by the municipality and others, but they're ultimately selected by the state to serve. The composition of the LPC is led by two co-chairs. Typically, one co-chair is the chief elected official of the community. This could be the mayor, town supervisor, or borough president. And the other is a member of the Regional Economic Development Council, or a designee of the REDC. And that person typically has specific ties to the community and region. The members that are selected for this committee are acting as ambassadors of their respective communities throughout the process and are here to ensure that all voices are heard and input is considered. So this is really important in that we think that you have a very strong chance to shape your community's future and provide input on the types of projects that your community wants to see implemented. We really want to hear your input, so please speak up during meetings, actively participate in discussions, and don't be afraid to ask questions. We also ask that you respect the opinions of others, engage in civil discussions, and be polite to all participants. So what should you expect? There will be regular meetings held throughout the planning process, and these meetings generally will be held approximately one per month. There will be some months sprinkled off. There will be some months off sprinkled in there, hopefully around the summertime, and will be about 1 to 2 hours in duration. You can also expect regular emails from either the consultant team or state representatives with meeting materials or information. We just ask that you do not share any information outside of the LPC while you're serving on the committee. In many cases, there may be documents that are not publicly available yet, or there may be documents submitted by project sponsors that contain confidential information. So we just ask that you be sensitive to sharing any documents outside of the committee while you're serving on this role. And we ask that you also be prepared to provide input on documents as they are prepared by the consultants. So just keep that in mind. And how will you help lead the process? So here are a few ways that you can help lead the process. So we are asking that you help identify the best ways to communicate with and engage the community. You'll be asked to recommend key stakeholders and groups and organizations that we should be hearing from. You'll also be asked to provide guidance and direction on documents as parts of the plan, help to identify potential projects for funding, and offer input and assistance with project evaluation and funding recommendations. There are also a number of ways that you can provide this feedback, and we cannot stress this enough, but we want to hear from you. And again, just please speak up during meetings, be an active participant in the process, and advocate for your community. If you do have questions throughout the process, please reach out to DOS or the consultant team at any time. This could be via email or phone. And then also, there may be ways that you can submit that you may be able to submit comments during the process, and others will be asked to provide comments as well. And this could be the DRI or New York Forward webpage, or surveys or other tools designed to capture information and feedback. So how do you prepare for an LPC meeting? So we know that you have been nominated for this position because of your knowledge or expertise or connections. However, we don't expect you to be subject matter experts. The consultant team will be really helping to provide information to you throughout the process. But we do ask that you review the materials that are sent to you by either the DOS or the consultant team, just so that you're well prepared for the topic of discussion at that meeting. And then we also ask that you think holistically about the projects and how they might impact the community and region. And make sure that while you're thinking about those impacts of projects on the community, reflecting on the input received from the community and how does all of that fit into the bigger picture of revitalization. So some questions that you might be able to ask yourself when reviewing and evaluating projects will be, is this project transformational in my downtown? Does it maybe have the opportunity to spur or catalyze additional investment? And who benefits from the implementation of the project? As an LPC member, you may be provided documents or information that isn't immediately available to the public, but you also may be approached by members of the media. So we're just asking that you be aware of the statements that you make and the information that you share. If you are unsure of how to respond to media requests, you can refer them to our Deputy Secretary of State for Public Affairs, Michelle Rosales, and her email address is on the screen here. If you are also unsure and don't want to go directly to that contact, it might make sense to go to an LPC co-chair first if you're unsure of how to respond to requests, or you can also talk directly to your DOS project manager on maybe the ways that you should be responding. We will also be going over the code of conduct in a few minutes, but just as a precursor, part of your service as an LPC member is adhering to what we call the code of conduct. And this code of conduct really just does ensure that because you are involved in a state program, that you are dedicated to the public interest and will serve and act in the public interest at all times. So you will be receiving a code of conduct form from your project manager right before LPC meeting one or at LPC meeting one. So this will provide you an opportunity to read through that code of conduct after we go through the training, as well as sign and submit that form so you are ready to fully participate in your role as an LPC member. Okay, so let's talk about the code of conduct. So what is the code of conduct? Basically, the code includes guidelines, standards, and procedures for local planning committee members to follow throughout both the DRI and the New York Forward planning process. And it really is an important precursor to your participation on the LPC because you will be providing input, helping to make decisions that have a real impact on the community, and just speaking with one another in general. So all LPC members, regardless of their affiliation, are required to receive the training, read and sign the code of conduct, and basically just indicate to the state that they fully understand the code and will adhere to its guidelines. It essentially states that the code is intended to address potential conflicts of interest between local planning committee members and the interests that do not serve the public. So how do we remember the code and how to follow it? One way to remember it is to remember DAD. So disclose all conflicts of interest, act in the public interest, and disqualify as necessary. So what does acting in the public interest mean for both the DRI and New York Forward programs? Generally, it refers to taking actions that benefit the common good of the community and just avoiding conflicts of interest in general. So it really states that no LPC member should use or attempt to use their position as a local planning committee member to secure unwarranted privileges or exemptions from themselves or others. And it also states that a member shall exercise duties and responsibilities in a manner that does not exert improper influence over another member. So for purposes of the code of conduct, such an exercise of improper influence would constitute a conflict of interest. And to build upon, serving in the public interest, we want to make sure that members are exercising responsibilities for the primary benefit of the public and in a manner where any benefit to the member or family member or a relative of the family member is incidental only. So during the DRI and New York Forward planning process, it is considered a conflict of interest if a particular action results in a benefit to the member, family member, or a relative of the family member that is more than incidental. So we did put together, kind of a quick checklist and things to think about for determining whether or not you have a conflict of interest that exists and would need to disqualify from discussions that might be taking place during LPC meetings. So first we would say identify your or your family members' financial and organizational interests, specifically in relation to proposed projects that you know about. So for example, do you or family members sit on an organizational board that is sponsoring a proposed project? Or do you or a family member own property within the DRI or New York Forward that is the site of a proposed project? Then we would ask that you look at personal and family relationships in relation to proposed projects. So do you have any familial relations to a project sponsor that is proposing a New York Forward project or a DRI project? Then consider any conflict of interest in relation to a DRI or New York Forward project. So if for any reason you are unable to act in the public interest because there exists a conflict arising from financial interest in a proposed project, we do just suggest that you err on the side of caution and disclose those potential conflicts that would prevent you from acting in the public interest, and then recusing yourself as necessary. And if you're unsure of whether or not you have a conflict or you need to disqualify, we do have a member of our staff who is an ethics officer that will be willing to answer any questions that you have regarding specific projects or your specific situation. Disclosing conflicts of interest is of the utmost importance during your participation during the program. And we just ask that if you do identify a conflict of interest, just disclose those to the state or the consultant team at the earliest time possible as soon as you realize that you do have a conflict. So right now, you might not know what your conflicts are or what conflicts you might have, and that's okay. And I will say that it will become more apparent to you what conflicts of interest you might have when projects are officially proposed to the LPC. And this, just for your knowledge, will take place around the third or fourth LPC meeting. And what happens if a potential conflict of interest is not reported, or if you know of someone else's potential conflict of interest and it's not disclosed? Again, you can allege a complaint of a member's non-compliance to the code of conduct with the ethics officer at the Department of State. And this ethics officer will determine if further action is needed. If the complaint is substantiated, the member might be at risk of being removed from the LPC, and or the associated project could be removed from consideration for possible funding. We just say that it's important to note any appearance of impropriety or an appearance of improper conduct. All of that should be avoided. Once a conflict of interest is disclosed, the LPC member must formally document and file these conflicts with the state. All members with conflicts will be required to sign a recusal form that's shown on the right-hand side of the screen. And each LPC member will receive an electronic recusal form by email, and they will also be provided at LPC meetings for members to sign and submit as needed. When documenting conflicts, the state and consultant team will be vigilant and keep a list of recusals and associated forms that are submitted by LPC members, and these will be updated at each LPC meeting. And to ensure that members are aware of all documented recusals within the community, the LPC co-chairs and the state team will be responsible for reminding members at the beginning of each LPC meeting of their recusal and the obligation to recuse themselves when that particular project with conflicts of interest are being discussed. And what do we mean by recusal in this process? Well, in our case, recusal means removal. So a recusal does restrict a person from participating in discussion at the matter at hand. So during LPC meetings, it will mean that LPC members may not vote, attempt to influence a discussion, or discuss where there might be potential conflicts of interest. So for example, if a conflict of interest has been reported or determined, if possible, the LPC member must remove themselves from the area where activities related to such DRI or New York Forward projects are being considered by the LPC for inclusion in the strategic investment plan. The activities include voting, discussing, or deliberating on that particular proposed project or projects. The LPC member exercising recusal should not attempt to influence other LPC members engaging in those types of activities. So we say that, if possible, remove yourself from the room just so there is no appearance of improper conduct. However, we do realize that it's not always possible to remove yourself when things are being discussed organically. So in this situation, an LPC member is not expected to, jump out of the seat and remove themselves from the room at every brief mention of the project. But the member should exercise principles of recusal by refraining from providing comments on that particular project. At the end of the DRI or New York Forward planning process, all members will vote on an entire slate of projects, which will then be recommended to the state for potential funding. Voting will likely take place in person during an LPC meeting and will be officially recorded on a ballot, which LPC members will sign and provide to the state. So when completing the ballot, all LPC members will have an opportunity to recuse themselves for particular projects that they need to refrain from voting on. So just keep that in mind. And then lastly, all LPC members must follow the determinations made by the ethics officer in accordance with the code of conduct and other applicable laws. This can be somewhat confusing, although if you do have questions regarding the code or maybe a potential conflict that you might have with a particular project or, just within the DRI New York Forward area, we do have our ethics counsel contact information here on the screen, and you may contact her at any time via phone or email. So what's next? Some materials have already been sent to you and some will be coming your way shortly, most likely from your DOS project manager or the consultant for your community. We would suggest that first and foremost, review the guidance document. This is a very comprehensive document that discusses the planning process, roles and responsibilities, outlines the required deliverables, and just goes into a little bit more detail than we discussed here today, and will just provide you with a deeper understanding of program goals and expectations. This can be found at the websites at Right. And we also encourage you to visit the websites and become familiar with strategic investment plans and other materials that have been created throughout the DRI and New York Forward planning processes. These also have the awarded projects from previous rounds, and it might just be helpful for you to understand the types of projects that have been awarded, as well as just get a better sense of the overall strategic investment plan as a whole. Very soon, you will receive an email with information about your first LPC meeting if you haven't already. And if you haven't, just keep an eye on your inbox for this important information. It'll have details regarding where your LPC meeting will be held and when it will take place and what you can expect. As always, the state team is here to assist you through the process, and we want to make sure that this is a fruitful and successful project for your community. So please reach out at any time. I do want to thank you for your time and attendance during the session and just reiterate that your commitment to this process is appreciated, and we look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.